Three interesting parables in today's gospel, in order: the mustard, the weeds and the wheat, the mustard seed, and the yeast. Now, I don't think political correctness was popular in Jesus' day, but we have it today, sometimes for good or bad. But Jesus maybe was way ahead of his time, because the three parables are very well balanced. The first one about the weeds and the wheat says a man sowed good seed in the field. The third one says a woman put yeast in a batch of dough. And the second one says a person, male or female, planted the mustard seed. So very well balanced. That encompasses all of us, male or female. And I think the order in which Jesus told them is very challenging to us. Let's start with the weeds and the wheat. You know, when I was a kid, growing up as a Catholic in the United States of America, I was sure that we were all the wheat. And everyone else in the world lived somewhere else in the world, had another religion, they were all weeds. They were the bad people. American Catholics were the best in the world. Pretty narrow view of the world and very, very prejudiced. Then I began to think, no, that's not right. The wheat are the good people, like me. And the weeds are all the sinners out there, like you. And I thought, no, that's not good either. I just have to look in the mirror and say, yeah, I'm pretty weedy. So now I realize that the weeds and the wheat are in me and in you. And I go back and forth between being good wheat and bad weeds several times a day. So what do I mean? Good wheat. Well, I usually start out the day as pretty good grain of wheat. As I've told you before, the first thing I do when I put my right foot in the floor out of the bed, I make the sign of the cross. Then 4 or 5 days a week, I start the day off by celebrating Mass. So that's pretty good. But then during the day, some of the weeds crop up. I get judgmental. I get gossipy. I get irritable. I get angry unnecessarily. I procrastinate. And so that's a lifetime challenge. A lifetime challenge. Our challenge is, can we become more and more wheat and less weeds? And the good news is, yes, and God gives us a whole lifetime to do that. That's what he means when he tells the slaves, don't pull up the weeds, because you might pull up the wheat as well. See, back in Jesus' day in Israel, there was a weed called darnel, D-A-R-N-E-L, and it looked exactly like wheat in its early growth. But finally, by full harvest, you could say, well, that's wheat and that's darnel. And he said, let them go together till harvest. Harvest for us is, as Jesus explained in the parable, the end of the world, or more personally, the end of our lives. We have our whole lives to get it straight. You know, I would hope that as we mature, there's less and less weeds in our personality and more wheat. And some of the great saints of our church have had that same path. The example I love to give is Paul. Before Paul became a Christian, he was pretty much a pretty bad weed. He was persecuting Christians. He observed, apparently approving of the stoning to death of Stephen, the first deacon martyr. Then he had that marvelous experience on the road to Damascus where he became a follower of Jesus Christ. And what a great follower. But he wasn't perfect from that on. Just read his letters, and even in the Acts of the Apostles, he was not an easy guy to get along with. James didn't like traveling with him. Stephen didn't like traveling with him. Barnabas didn't like traveling with him, and so on. And finally, at the end of his life, when he's in prison and dying, he says, now at last, it's no longer me, my big ego that got in the way my whole life. It's Christ who lives in me. So finally, most of the weeds were crushed in his life, and he became strong wheat, a great saint in our church. Hopefully, that can be true for all of us. Hopefully, as we mature, we find we're doing less wrong and more good. So that's the first challenge. How much weeds are in your life? How much wheat? Can you change that balance to be more like strong, good, nutritious wheat? The next one is the mustard seed. It's a little tiny seed. And if you plant it, like most little seeds, it becomes something much larger. In this case, this is a large bush so big that the birds can dwell in its branches. We could say, well, that's talking about the growth of the church. Started out very, very small, 12 apostles. Not too long after that, it became thousands because of the preaching of St. Peter and Paul. Now there's over 1 billion Christians on the planet Earth. So that little seed has become a large bush, if you will. But what about us? The seed of faith was planted in each one of us when we were baptized. Has it grown? Again, like myself, I think there were times in my early life when I felt, well, I didn't pick this faith. My parents and godparents gave it to me. I didn't choose baptism, so I was like a sponge. I just soaked up everything I was taught in school and catechism and by the nuns and priests. Then eventually, as I got older, I had to make some decisions for myself. Do I really believe this? What do I want to do with my life? And like so many people, I had doubts. And so the seed was still pretty small. Then hopefully it has become larger. In other words, my faith is stronger than it used to be. And it goes back and forth. When you read about the scandals of the church, some of the politics of the church, it may kind of sour us, and we may have questions, we may have doubts. But again, our faith needs to be strong as that mustard seed that grew into a large bush, strong to overcome all the problems that we do face in our life. Marital problems, financial problems, health problems, whatever. COVID. How strong was our faith during COVID, during all those other times in our life? Hopefully it's a strong faith, as strong as a large, large bush. And finally, perhaps the shortest, and I think maybe the most important of the parables, was about the woman with the yeast. Now, I think I've only tried to bake bread once, and it was a disaster. But I know if you bake bread, you're supposed to put a little bit of yeast, a little bit of leaven in the dough, and it rises. And so that's a symbol. Jesus really wasn't talking about bakery products. He's saying that our faith needs to enliven the world around us. We need to make this world a better place. Just coincidentally, someone told me the other day that during this 110-degree temperatures, someone took a bunch of dough, put a little yeast in it, stuck it in their outdoor mailbox, and 45 minutes later, it was a loaf of bread. I believe that. But again, I think we are meant to bring leaven to the world. We're meant to influence the world. You've heard me say so many times that what makes this liturgy good is not the music, not the readers, not the homily, not the environment. What makes this a good liturgy is what you do when you walk out of these doors. Do you make the world a better place? Do you enliven the world? Do you brighten up the world? Do you bring joy to those who are sad? Are you there for others? Are you leaven in their lives? Do you make them better, happier, whatever? That's the real challenge. So all three parables are about every one of us here. We are weeds and wheat all through our life, hopefully eventually more wheat and less weeds. Our faith needs to grow like that mustard seed, day in and day out, year in and year out. But most of all, like the apostles, we are sent out to change the world, to make the world a better place. Go out and be leaven.